1:32 a.m. The air is so still you could almost hear the commander's breathing. The target sits exactly 94 seconds of flight time away. A 20-pound shadow glides only 130 feet above the ground, moving straight toward a Russian drone warehouse between Donetsk and Makiivka. Inside that warehouse, at this very moment, sit tens of thousands of Shahed drones and fiber-optic FPV drones, recently unloaded from 12 trucks under the cover of darkness. The Kremlin is convinced it has pulled off its boldest deception yet, baiting Ukraine with a well-known decoy site in Kursk. But what Russia does not know is that Ukraine has been waiting for this exact moment. And in roughly 8 minutes this heavily secured storage site will erupt like the grand finale of a 4th of July fireworks show, only 24 hours early. Moscow changes posture. The lights inside the command room shift color, the screens flare to life all at once. Security forces prepare for a major operation, Operation Thunderbolt. After the shock of losing 10,000 UAVs in a single strike just months earlier, the Kremlin had no intention of repeating the same mistake. On the map, Kursk lit up. The satellite view zoomed in. A warehouse complex came into focus, sitting out in the open, fully exposed. Access roads, parking lots, roof lines, everything was visible, like a target waiting to be hit. But back in the shadows behind it, a convoy of trucks with headlights off peeled away from the main route. They broke formation, slipped off the highway, and disappeared down side roads. The truck beds opened, cargo came off quickly, again and again, with no wasted movement. They believed they were controlling the game, but far above them, a UAV hovered motionless in the darkness. Its lens zoomed in slowly. License plates, cargo counts, unloading times. Every frame was captured and turned into data. Coordinates layered over coordinates, and Kiev did not take the bait. Instead, Kiev followed Russia's script right up until the moment it rewrote the ending. A few hours later, Russian radar started to flicker. The air defense map shifted. Jamming zones widened and overlapped. Kursk burned bright across the entire display. The entire air defense and electronic warfare network was activated to shield the decoy site in Kursk. And at that exact moment, Ukraine struck. 10 Palyanitsia missiles tore through the night sky, aimed directly at the decoy depot. Russia's response was pure frenzy. The Krasuka 4 jammers roared at full power. Pantsir S-1 systems spat fire non-stop like broken water hoses, while S-400 batteries locked onto every moving speck on the screen. Even Russian infantry jumped from armored vehicles and launched manpads into the sky like a wild storm of flares in the dead of night. Russia performed brilliantly, exactly according to the script Ukraine had written for them. Most of Ukraine's expendable junk was intercepted. Only 2 missiles made it through, sparking a few small fires on the outer edge of the decoys in Kursk. Across Russian radio traffic, triumphant shouting drowned out the static. Russian commanders believed they had shattered Ukraine's attack completely. In Kiev, the Kairos battalion specialists remained locked onto the telemetry stream. A quiet nod passed between the operations teams. Jamming phase complete. Activate the second layer. There was no room for celebration here, only precision measured down to the millisecond. Moscow's fatal mistake was believing the enemy had run out of resources. It had arrogantly concentrated nearly everything on defending the Donetsk stronghold, and that arrogance opened the door for the next wave. 1:35 a.m. The moment the first Palyanitsia strike forced Russia to shut down airspace over Kursk, Ukraine followed with 3 more Palyanitsia missiles. On Russian radar screens, it all looked identical to the first attack. Same direction, same path, same apparent destination, Kursk. Russian duty officers sneered. Here we go again. Same script. But at the branching point, reality flipped upside down. On Russian screens, the trajectories suddenly bent. The vectors once locked on Kursk drifted, then broke away entirely. The 3 Palyanitsia missiles kept broadcasting a false route toward Kursk through electronic decoys. But their actual bodies had already veered off, racing straight toward Donetsk. The commander hurled his coffee aside and roared, "Red alert! All batteries, open fire immediately. Stop them at all costs." At the Donetsk fortress, Pantsir and S-400 crews snapped into action. The order came sharp and final. Lock, fire. Interceptor missiles streaked upward, drawing fiery lines that formed a steel wall across the sky. One by one, the incoming Ukrainian missiles were blown apart in the air. 3 targets destroyed. The reports came in fast, thick with confidence. But the instant those missiles detonated, they released a lethal parting gift, chaff, flares and dense smoke that blanketed the sky. Suddenly, Russia's billion-dollar radar network suffered a collective heart attack. Radars went blind. Thermal cameras flashed white. The Krasuka 4 overloaded. Signals on the screens fractured. Electronic interference flooded the system. Tactical maps dissolved into warped waves of static. Targets flickered, vanished, reappeared, and disappeared again. The commander gripped the edge of the table, staring at a screen spiraling out of control. On the ground, soldiers rushed in confusion to put out the fires from falling flares, while the Pantsir's automatic gun turrets began spinning wildly in autonomous mode. And while Russian air defense crews were still wiping glass and firing at ghosts inside the smoke, the real predators, the silent killers, had already moved in. This was the start of a savage 8-minute countdown. Ukraine deployed a 4-tier aerial formation, coordinated by the Syros Battalion and the Modar Squadron. And for the first 2 minutes, everything centered around the cheapest targets. 1:38 a.m. As the magnesium fires still smoldered on the ground, 3 cheap RF drones emerged from the darkness. They pumped out dense, chaotic signals, turning themselves into irresistible targets. The Russians, already on edge, reacted instantly. Target acquired. Clear them out immediately. The scream echoed through the command bunker. Inside the Pantsir S-1, the gunner did not hesitate. His thumb slammed the red launch switch. 2 57E6 interceptor missiles blasted off the rails, leaving twin tails of fire behind them. At less than 40 feet, their proximity fuses triggered. The first 2 decoys disintegrated in an instant. Blackened carbon fiber, copper wire, and cheap circuit boards rained down like shredded high-tech paper, lighting the field below with orange bursts of flame. Targets 1 and 2 neutralized, the gunner shouted triumphantly. Without missing a beat, shoulder-fired Manpad's teams joined the fight to hunt down the last target. Crash! A heat-seeking missile tore through the smoke and slammed straight into the third drone's cheap engine. It spun toward the earth like a dying cannonball before exploding. All targets destroyed. A sergeant shouted over the radio. In Moscow's command chain, a brief wave of relief spread. Inside the Ukrainian control room, the reaction was completely different. Everything was unfolding exactly as planned. A Syros battalion operator silently watched the telemetry. Then a status marker changed on the screen. Phase 1 complete. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. The trap had closed. 1:41 a.m. Just as the Russian system believed the skies were finally clear, a gap opened. 10 Pashka drones, trailing ultra-thin fiber-optic cables, rushed in at just 150 feet altitude. These lines were signal-free, GPS-free, and immune to electronic jamming. Trying to jam them now was like trying to interfere with the Wi-Fi of a physical network cable. At once the Russian radar display flickered like a dying television. The Pantsir S-1 crew, sweat dripping beneath their helmets, scrambled to lock on. Target acquired. Sector 4. Fire! 2 more 57E6 missiles erupted from the launchers, carving white smoke trails into the sky. Boom! Pashka 1 and 2 shattered in a spectacular spray of glass fragments and scorched plastic. Debris fell like glowing snow across the mud of Donetsk. At the same moment, infantry in BMPs and BTRs stopped waiting for orders. They shouldered their portable air defense launchers and fired. 2 more orange streaks surged upward into the night. Pashka 3 and 4 burst into flames, burning like magnesium torches in the sky before crashing down. The reports inside the bunker came quickly. The Russian commander clenched his fist, eyes fixed on the static-filled display, trying to maintain the calm of a man who believed his defense was working. He felt like a hero. He had no idea he had just spent millions of dollars to shoot down little more than glass fibers. A few miles away, the Ukrainian operator gripped his joystick and watched 2 red failure lines appear on screen. Loss of signal, number 3, number 4 offline, he said it quietly. There was no panic, because while Russian forces were celebrating those 4 dramatic shootdowns, they had completely lost awareness of the remaining 6 killers. Those 6 Pashkas were the real nightmare. Thanks to their physical fiber connection, they were almost invisible to detection systems. To Russian radar, they appeared as faint shadows drifting behind a chemical smoke curtain. Then the radar officer's control board flashed yellow. Report, auxiliary radar array is fading. I can't find them. And then, without warning, all 6 Pashkas struck like a swarm of hornets. They slammed directly into the auxiliary radar dish and the heatsink of the Krasuka 4 station. Green electrical fire burst from the EW unit, lighting the entire base like a scene out of an old science fiction film. The Russian commander could do nothing but scream into a radio that now answered only with static. Outside, infantry fired Manpads blindly into the smoke, their missiles hitting nothing but empty air. In Kiev, the Ukrainian operator drew a steady breath and looked calmly at the radar screen. Jamming is useless against our red thread. It's like shouting in a room while the drone is wearing Sony noise-cancelling headphones. The red thread had officially severed both the eyes and ears of the Donetsk fortress. And with the defense network now blind and paralyzed, the countdown entered its final 4 minutes. The heart of the 10,000 drone warehouse was now exposed, and the finishers were coming. 1:45 a.m., As the Krasuka 4 began to overload and smoke and dust consumed the area, Baba Yaga crawled in like a stubborn old truck, scattering thermite into ventilation shafts and clusters of supply trucks. Inside the flickering darkness of the Russian bunker, heat alerts erupted one after another. Abnormal heat on the roof. Activate immediately. Orders came rapid fire. Then 3 heavy vampire helicopters plunged in, flying so low their rotors tore at the roof of the warehouse itself. They were not there to snipe, they were there to unleash hell. One after another, they dropped thermite bombs directly into the ventilation shafts and fuel lines of the underground bunker. The bombs fell in a dense, frantic burst that lasted barely 15 seconds. The effect was immediate. 2,500 degrees Celsius heat like liquid sunlight poured into the underground structure. Blinding white magnesium light ripped through the darkness, turning the entire warehouse into a burning furnace. On the ground, soldiers rushed forward with fire extinguishers, but the heat wave drove them back as if the gates of hell had opened in front of them. A Russian gunner reported a hit on one target, but that success meant nothing. The sheer temperature created violent convection currents, pulling smoke and dust into a wall no sensor could see through. Russia's billion-dollar thermal cameras now saw only one thing: blinding white. 1:47 a.m. Moments later, the remaining 6 Tashka wave units charged directly into the underground bunker and the cluster of 12 transport trucks. Inside the Donetsk perimeter, Russian forces were now completely disoriented. Fire into the smoke, hit anything that moves, the Russian commander shouted over the radio. BMP-2 crews began losing control. Gun barrels spun wildly, tracer rounds carving streaks through the darkness at targets they could barely identify. On the western flank, a Manpads team caught an infrared signature. Target acquired. Fire! A heat-seeking missile launched from the shoulder, twisting through the chemical smoke before slamming into Pashka number 5. The drone did not simply explode. Its carbon fiber frame burst into millions of shining fragments, while its ultra-thin glass fiber snapped like a whip, showering fiery sparks into the Russian trenches. At the same time, the Pantsir S-1 joined the blind fire chaos. Its twin 30mm cannons thundered, hurling a wall of high-velocity rounds into the fog. One shell clipped the wing of Tashka number 6, barely 60 feet from the main cargo bay. Its battery short-circuited instantly, throwing off a brilliant neon blue flash that lit the entire field before the drone plunged into the mud and exploded in orange fire. Back on the Ukrainian side, the operator's knuckles turned white, sweat dripped into his eyes. 2 more dots disappeared from the display. The remaining 4 held formation. A command was entered quickly. Trajectory locked. Speed surged. Initiate final phase. Using the fog and the slicing speed of their approach, the last 4 drones punched through the firewall. Their course was set straight for the 12 transport trucks parked side by side, each loaded with jet fuel and highly flammable lithium components. 43 seconds remaining. 27 seconds. 9 seconds. Explosion. A massive detonation ripped through the facility, shaking the entire Donetsk complex like a volcanic eruption. It became a brutal domino chain. The lithium fire ignited the warheads. The warheads ignited the fuel, and the thermite heat already in place turned the entire site into a man-made sun. The heat was so intense that NASA satellites detected a record-setting thermal signature. In just 8 precise minutes, 10,000 drones, the backbone of Russia's winter offensive, had been reduced to twisted molten waste. It looked like the grand finale of a 4th of July fireworks show, except this time it was as if a technician had dropped a lit cigar into the main fuel reservoir. A clean, cold, mathematical annihilation. Russia had built a fortress of steel. Ukraine used a threat as fragile as glass to destroy it from the inside. 10,000 strategic assets disappeared from the map in one burst of fire. 4 a.m. by sunrise, the truth of that 8-minute mathematical purge was impossible to deny. The 12 trucks and 10,000 drones were no longer military assets. They were a smoking, jagged heap of scrap metal worth $200 million. This was not just a tactical hit. It was a strategic blow aimed directly at the Kremlin. By destroying this hub, Ukraine stripped Russia of its ability to manage FPV drone formations across the Kursk and Donetsk fronts for the next 2 to 3 weeks. Think about what that means. For nearly a month, Russian infantry may be forced to operate with severely reduced aerial observation. Armored columns, without their primary drone shield overhead, become dramatically easier to track and destroy. This 8-minute strike did not merely burn down a warehouse. It pushed back Moscow's offensive in the east by months. Logistics on this scale cannot be rebuilt overnight. And you cannot simply download a new stockpile of 10,000 drones from the cloud.